All right, here we go. So let me know when you guys can see me and hear me. And we're going to get going pretty quickly here to be as efficient as we possibly can, just because at the end of the day, um, it's not early, right? And you guys want to probably study and get to bed and all that good stuff. So, and any other work you've got going on. So, let's kind of get moving here. Your quiz tomorrow and on Wednesday, right, depending on which class you are, is on the French Revolution and everything that was kind of following it, right? So that includes Napoleon and eventually the Congress of Vienna. So hopefully things like the Congress of Vienna should be fairly fresh in your minds just because we just did it recently, but obviously the French Revolution stuff might be a little bit further in your brain. So let's kind of jump right into that and discuss what is going on with that. So your quiz is going to be the same type of quizzes you've had pretty much most of the year. Somewhere between that 30 and 35 questions is likely, I would say, and it's dealing with all three of those topics we were just discussing. You might see things like political cartoons. You might see a map here or there that you would need to then be able to kind of pull information from to answer questions that we ask using background information that you already are aware of. So at this point, it is a little after 8. I'm sure some stragglers are going to show up in a bit, but let's kind of just get rolling. Is the chat? I don't know if I have chat, which is a bit of a problem if I'm trying to communicate with you guys. Hold on 1 second for me. Great. Okay. So I can. Is the chat? I don't know if I have chat. Me. Okay. So this should be working now. Fine. I can chat with you guys if need be. Okay. So let's get rolling. French Revolution, right? So just pardon those things. So we are talking about what's called the Ancien regime, right? And King Louis the 16th in France, right? We remember that France had issues with debt thanks to helping the United States during the American Revolution, right? They had fought a war with England during the 7 Years' War, which was the part of the French and Indian War in the United States. And then ultimately the American Revolution, the French side with the Americans. And you are going to have a lot of money that's being spent by the French that's going to hurt them quite a bit economically. You also have this tax system where the nobility and the clergy, they didn't really pay taxes, right? And the tax burden was going to be shouldered pretty much by your commoners, right? So if you are putting all the tax burden on people that don't necessarily have a lot of money and you're spending more than you are taking in, it's gonna lead to economic issues, right? So no real money in their coffers. So there were attempts at reforming this, and they didn't go particularly well. And when paired with some situations, in particular storms and ruined crops over a year or two, you're going to have now widespread hunger in France. That's going to kind of set the stage and kind of make the conditions ripe for the Enlightenment ideas that had been also flourishing in and around Paris and France to basically really ignite, right, this fire, if you will, and kind of get this ball rolling with the revolution. So we talked about France, right? So just a reminder, France is kind of right here if you are looking for that today. So just to make sure you know where we are talking about in the world. So let's keep going, right? So in response to this economic crisis that had been um, that's going on in France, right? King Louis is going to call a meeting for the first time in something like 177 years or something like that, of what's called the Estate General, which is their assembly essentially that can help to make laws, right, of people that are not from the monarchy. In the Estates General, you had three different levels, right? You had the first estate, which was the clergy, the second estate, which was the nobility, and the third estate, which was meant to represent really everybody else, the commoners, right? So you can see how the clergy, there's a lot fewer of them, and they're going to kind of still have one vote. You might have the nobility, which will also have one vote, and then everybody else, right, is going to have one vote as well, right? So the proportion of the representation is not particularly good, right, for your average person. And therefore, when the meeting of the Estates General is called and things don't go particularly well for this third estate and they start to feel that they are not being taken seriously, you end up getting them leaving, right? They leave the meeting in Versailles and they go off and found what is known as the National Assembly. And King Louis doesn't really like this, again, as this is his meeting and he wants it to go smoothly, I suppose. And he attempts to block the actions of the National Assembly by closing their meeting place. And the Third Estate representatives who were there, they ultimately just leave Versailles anyway. And they go off and find what amounts to sort of this indoor tennis court just outside of Versailles, and they swear what is known as the tennis court oath, and the idea was that they were not going to give up until a French constitution was established. This chain of events is going to lead to what is known as the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, and ultimately the first French constitution, right? The Declaration of Rights of Man is sort of, I suppose, like our American Bill of Rights, where rights are laid out and established, written, and agreed upon, and basically signed into law for the First French Republic. So, in response now to this tennis court oath, there will be a bonus question on this quiz. I'm going to have to think of one in a minute here, but we're not going to get to that yet. So, in response to the tennis court oath, King Louis is going to kind of send troops to Paris to quell some uprisings that were happening as a result of the National Assembly making things kind of get rowdy, but also the food shortages we were talking about, right? In particular, bread shortages. So you also have King Louis XVI removing the finance minister of France, a man named Jacques Necker. And between these things, right, and the people not taking kindly to the arrival of these troops in Paris, you are going to get revolutionaries basically responding to this by attacking and seizing what is known as the Bastille prison on July 14th. And they're going to go and they're looking for stores of gunpowder. They're going to end up killing many of the guards and the governor of the Bastille. And this is going to be the symbolic beginning of what it really becomes the French Revolution, right? You're going to have them tear this place apart brick by brick, again, being symbolic, tearing down this particular symbol of oppression of the rule of King Louis XVI. So, now, a few months after the storming of the Bastille, you are going to have the issues of hunger and food shortages and bread shortages in general kind of come back to play here, right? And when there are rumors of grain that's being hoarded and stored at the Palace of Versailles, you are going to have a particular group of women that are going to essentially march on Versailles over these issues. And as they go, and as they begin marching, they're going to pick up a crowd and more and more people until they become a mob who goes in and storms Versailles and ultimately sees King Louis XVI and his queen, his wife, Marie Antoinette. And the crowd is going to force them to move to Paris, where they are going to kind of watch more closely over them. So, in an attempt now to contain the revolution, right, you have Austria and Prussia, who are Austria being family to Marie Antoinette, the rulers of Austria, I should say, being family to Marie Antoinette, and also in line with Prussia, and also monarchies, right? They are extremely worried about the sentiment that's arising out of Paris, and they are looking to squash the French Revolution in its place, right? So they end up going to war with France, and they begin marching and moving troops and pushing towards France. Um, you're going to have, I don't have it on a slide here, but you're going to have the eventual escape attempt by King Louis XVI and his wife Marie Antoinette, and ultimately after their escape and then subsequent recapture and being brought back to Paris, and then the war not going particularly well for the French, King Louis XVI is going to be declared as kind of encouraging the enemy. He's going to be stripped of his power by the National Assembly, and he is going to be tried and found guilty and sentenced to death by guillotine. His death is going to mark the beginning of what is known and what becomes known as the Terror, or the Reign of Terror. So during the Reign of Terror, during this time period following King Louis XVI's death, there is an attempt to create this new French Republic again, right? Taking it even further, trying to further equalize everyone before the law, stripping nobles of titles, everyone being called citizen, among other changes, removing things like the church, all of these things, right? Kind of stepping away from the way things used to be, drastically, right? This kind of radical change. And at the end of the day, you know, after year of people basically being killed by what becomes known as the the Committee of Public Safety, which is this emergency kind of government that's put in place to handle this transition and this kind of crazy period following the death of King Louis XVI. You're going to have the death of all of these enemies of the state, right? And of the revolution over the next year. So through internal power struggles of this Committee of Public Safety that's led by a man named Maximilien Robespierre, among 11 other people, Robespierre himself is going to be kind of go too far, right? And when he does, the people are going to turn against him. He is going to attempt to, allegedly anyway, attempt to kill himself, and he's going to fail. He is going to eventually be arrested and then executed by guillotine. All right. So, as far as outcomes of the French Revolution in particular, right, we are going to have the death of a monarch, of Louis XVI, right, at the hands of the people he reigned over, right? That's a pretty incredibly radical thing to take place, and it changes the world as we know it. Right, so you're gonna have the end of the monarchy, the absolute monarchy in France for sure. Right, you're gonna have war with neighboring countries who feared the revolution would spread to them, in particular Austria and Prussia. Right, and then lastly, you are going to get the Reign of Terror and the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte following all of this, as a strong figure who had to bring kind of order to this chaos, I suppose. Okay. So we're going to leave that there for the French Revolution. We're going to lose captions for a moment until I get the next group of slides up. So let's do that right now. Are there any questions? Are there any questions about that kind of first group of stuff? If you do have it, any questions, feel free to post them in chat and I'll try to get it. Hello, Ellie. How are you? All right. Moving on to now talking about Napoleon. So here is one of the famous paintings of Napoleon and one of his charges. You can see here he is again. So let's get to some meat, right? So he is born Napoleon de Bonaparte on Corsica, which is this island kind of off of the coast of France and Italy, right here. He is born in 1769 to this minor Italian nobility, right? So he is fairly highborn, I suppose, and it's going to kind of go from there, right? So he is going to be afforded the opportunity to attend military academy at a young age and serve in the French army, where he is going to kind of come into a command, and he is going to lead his contingents to kind of some relatively a large amount of victories, right? He's going to be a military leader during the French Revolution, at these wars with Prussia and Austria in particular, and he is going to also win some victories in Italy and gain popularity. He's and such. Okay, so in 1799, he is going to carry out what is called a coup d'état, which is a seizure of power. He's going to overthrow the Directory, which was the name of the legislative assembly in France that had evolved into. And he is going to eventually gain so much power that he is going to declare himself emperor of the French. So what he is trying to accomplish is he's trying to unify Europe and under essentially French domination. He's going to go to war with a number of the European countries as a result of these aims, right? So he goes to war with England, Prussia, the Austrian Empire, right? Russia, Sweden, Portugal, you name it. Most of Europe he is going to end up in conflict with as a result of his actions and reign. So he is going to create a French empire, right? He's going to change France drastically. So in 1801, he attempts to take over, to really retake what's called the colony of Saint Domingue, which is essentially the Dominican Republic today, and Haiti. So this is not successful, right? And when this fails, he is ultimately gonna give up on a possibility of an American empire, and he is going to sell the French land in the western part of the United States. He's going to sell it to the Americas and concentrate on Europe. He's going to sell what's called the Louisiana Territory to the United States in the Louisiana Purchase to Thomas Jefferson's administration for $15 million in 1803. I don't have a map of that. Maybe I should just show it for kicks here if you give me 2 seconds. Louisiana Purchase. All right, so the Louisiana Purchase, we're going to lose captions for a moment here. This is the Louisiana Purchase, right? This is the Louisiana Territory that essentially is purchased from France, and this is the territory that they had prior to. All right, so moving on. So you have now Britain, Russia, Austria, and Sweden join up in what's called a coalition, and they join forces against Napoleon, right? And Napoleon is going to crush this enemy in several brilliant battles. He's going to force Austria, Russia, and Sweden to sign peace treaties as a result of his ability to kind of defeat them with his genius, I suppose. So in 1805, the British are going to happen to win this battle known at Trafalgar, which is going to kind of ensure British naval superiority. And ultimately, this is going to be a nail kind of in a coffin of Napoleon a little bit as far as invading any thoughts of invading Britain, I suppose. So he's going to look for kind of other ways to potentially control Britain. But moving out from that, he's going to control elsewhere in Europe, right? He's going to control Portugal, Sweden, the Ottoman Empire even in parts, right? He's going to put puppet rulers and family members on the throne in some of these countries. He's going to create alliances with others and in aims to kind of continue to expand this French empire, right? Expand the reach of the French and the aims of the French and uniting it all under this French banner, right? And the French Empire is going to reach its largest extent really from about 1807 to 1812. So in 1812, he is going to continue to push for his expansion, and he is going to start a campaign in June in 1812, and he is going to be moving towards Russia and Moscow, right? And he's going to start this off with about 400,000 troops, what comes known as the Grand Army. And he is going to march towards Moscow, right? And the Russians are going to practice what is called a scorched earth policy, right? And the scorched earth policy, the Russians are going to destroy everything in Napoleon's path. They're going to destroy the crops, they're going to destroy shelters, you name it, right? And ultimately, as time goes on and some battles are happening, you're going to have the supply chain break down, right? And people are going to begin dying of disease and starvation. And at the end of the day, he's going to get bogged down, right? And as time goes on, he's going to get stuck in around Moscow in September in 1812. And if anyone knows anything about kind of northern latitudes or Russia, once you get kind of past September here, you are going to have the weather is going to be a major issue, right? So ultimately, Napoleon is going to enter Moscow, again, to it being burned to ashes by the Tsar, and he is hoping to wait here, kind of hoping for the Tsar to surrender, but ultimately the Tsar doesn't, and they are forced to turn around, and as they march back, the weather is just going to take its toll, and he will again start from about 420,000 troops to arriving back to where he started with only 28,000 troops remaining. He's going to lose a large amount of his power as a result of this, and the other countries, right, are going to see this as an opening, right? They're going to see this as a possibility, and they're going to smell blood in the water, and they are going to band together to attack. So we're going to kind of continue on here, right? So once Napoleon he's crowns himself emperor first, right? He's successful really until this defeat in Russia, and when these countries kind of band together, they are able to overcome Napoleon's forces, and he is going to be exiled to what is called Elba. So I'm going to write that in here. So he's going to be exiled to Elba for a little while, where he is going to eventually be able to make his way off of the island, and he's going to be able to return, and he's going to kind of march his way back to Paris. When he arrives at Paris, he's going to just kind of take control again. People start to follow him. He's going to build up an army again, and you're going to now once again need a coalition to come together to fight him again, right? And he will lose at the Battle of Waterloo, eventually to the coalition forces, and he is going to be exiled one last time to St. Helena, which is out in the Pacific Ocean. So Elba is here off of the coast of Italy, and St. Helena is way out here, way off the coast of Africa, really pretty much directly in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, where he is going to spend the rest of his days. So as far as the legacy of Napoleon, right? Napoleon's legacy comes down to a couple things, right? The Napoleonic Code being a large part of this, right? Napoleon has an unsuccessful attempt to unify Europe under French dominion, even though he did have quite a large empire at the time. The Napoleonic Code is also this new French law code that kind of equalizes citizens before the law. It practices religious toleration. It's pro-business. It restores Catholicism in France, which is a step, which is moving back toward a religious aspect from the kind of atheistic mindset of the French Revolution. You're going to also have a national banking system. You're going to have public schools being established, all as a result of Napoleon and his system. So also Napoleon's legacy is going to awaken kind of feelings of national pride in France, right? It's going to contribute to this growth of nationalism, and the French are going to be extremely proud of themselves, right? These things are things that people can be proud of, right? So you're going to have Napoleon again placing puppets in power, right? And one of these places was in Spain, right? And his replacing the King of Spain with his brother, actually, is going to kind of set off rebellions in Spanish America, and many former colonies of Spain and Portugal are going to begin to gain their independence as a result of not being able to kind of deal with what's going on over there. And we are going to kind of be talking about that in a unit coming up. Lastly, Napoleon kind of turned France into a centralized state with a constitution, right? He is going to be one of the largest and earliest conscripted modern armies, right? You're going to have elections being held, right? And it expanded suffrage, even though the suffrage is still limited. Suffrage being the right to vote, right? So, more citizens had rights to property and access to education. French citizens lost many rights to them, during that had promised to them earlier, however. There were things that they lost. So, you have the abolition of the Holy Roman Empire, and this is going to kind of come to the creation of the new Germany, right? So Napoleon's decision to sell France's to the Louisiana Territory to America is going to double the size of it and usher in this age of American expansion. Okay, so let's pause again momentarily here, and I'm going to go to our last part of the slides. I'm going to just take a minute or two break. If you give me a second, I would appreciate it. I'll be right back. All right, here we go again. So there is going to be an extra credit question. If you have been paying attention to us in class and the videos and stuff, you may actually already know the answer to this, but I'm going to just simply ask the question, what was the phrase that Marie Antoinette supposedly said that never actually did when the mob was coming to Versailles to look for these stores of flour and bread? Right, the phrase was supposedly, she said, was "let them eat cake," which was not actually ever said, or would be translated to that anyway, but it wasn't actually said. So anyway, that's going to be the question for you guys. So moving on from this now to our last part of this. Okay. So we're talking about the Congress of Vienna now and the rise of nationalism. So we did this the last 2 days in class, so hopefully this should be fairly fresh, right? So we know after Napoleon's defeat in his final exile to St. Helena, the victorious countries now are going to have to decide what to do about the changes Napoleon had made in Europe, right? Should they keep Napoleon's reforms or should they undo them? Napoleon had redrawn the map of Europe himself. How should they redraw it again, if at all? So the victors meet at the capital of the Austrian Empire in Vienna, right? And the meeting becomes known as the Congress of Vienna, where you have the 5 great powers participating: Austria, Russia, Prussia, Great Britain, who had formed the coalition to beat France, and they include France as well as the defeated power as a means of providing them a voice to allow them to be somewhat satisfied with the outcome here. So the Congress of Vienna, one of the big things that's going to come with it, right, is the attempt to restore Europe as it had been, right, before the French Revolution and the Napoleonic conquests. So, as a result, some of the decisions that you're going to get out of the Congress of Vienna, right, is the idea of surrounding France with strong countries to prevent further future French aggression and restore this balance of power, if you will. So the hope was that all powers would be relatively the same strength and that no country would then be a major threat to one another if everyone was roughly equal, right? The example I used in class was if you're going to have to fight someone, you probably would rather fight someone who is smaller than you, right? Not bigger than you or kind of equal to you if you were forced to fight with someone. So if everything was equal and everyone's going to get bloodied up relatively equally, if there happened to be a war that broke out, then it kind of acts as a deterrent. Right? So also they're going to redraw the political maps of Europe to expand the powers territory that they, the winners anyway, right? And ultimately create some new countries in some spots, right? And the last big part is the idea of restoring these dethroned monarchies to their thrones, right? So where Napoleon had come in and put people like his brother or cousins or other people, these puppets in charge, right? It's going to restore the bloodlines and the monarchies that were actually there. Okay, so these maps are again not particularly great here. However, you are going to kind of see the height of the French right here, and then ultimately France is going to be kind of brought back. You're going to have Great Britain, you're going to have Portugal and Spain, you're going to have the Austrian Empire in this pink, you're going to have Prussia right here, and then you're going to end up having kind of independent Germanic kingdoms and principalities, and you're going to have independent Italian kingdoms and principalities as well. And that's going to kind of eventually be unified into what we know today as just Italy and Germany. Right? So, there are some new political philosophies that emerge as a result of this Congress of Vienna, right? So, the first is this idea of conservatism, right? And you usually have members of this wealthy class and the nobility, right? And the reason for that is that it's kind of desiring little or no change. It likes the status quo, right? The 19th century conservative, right, is typically in favor of monarchies, right? They, once again, like the status quo. Where on the opposite side of the coin, you have the 19th century liberal, who is usually kind of a middle class or a merchant, and they typically want a voice where they haven't had one in the past, right? Therefore, they're going to look and want elected parliaments, right? Elected assemblies. They want more power at the end of the day, right? There is a characterization. There's this desire for change at the end. That's what they are looking for, right? They're looking for change, and they want to do it usually incrementally through the elected parliaments. So we also have the idea of radicals, right, and radicalism, and radical change, right, is typically extreme change, right? And radicals could come from all classes, right? They're typically in super favor of the ideals of the French Revolution, equality for all. They favor drastic changes. These are the type of people that are beheading the kings of France, that are changing, a lot of what we saw during the French Revolution and the Reign of Terror and things like that, right? That is kind of radical change. Okay, so you're also going to get this rise of nationalism, right, as this powerful force that's existing in European politics during the 19th century. Is going to be one of the major areas of contention during the 1800s and the lead up eventually to World War I, right? So it all comes down now to this modern idea of what is a nation state, right? We had kingdoms, but now what is a nation, right? So a nation is a community of people who share several common characteristics, right? Things like language, religion, culture, territory, and land, right? These things all bind us together as a country, as a nation, right? In this particular community. And people are fond of those things, right? And if they band together in this country as a result of those common characteristics, right? People are prideful in their heritage, right? And nationalism is just this extension of this extreme pride in their country, in their nation, right? Um, and people's loyalty, the idea should be to the nation, to the people in the nation who share this common culture, and not necessarily to a king or an empire specifically. Nationalism is the desire for political independence in some cases by a people with a separate identity, but no country of their own, right? So that's another form of nationalism, right? There are people that have a nation by this definition. It might not be fully recognized on the international stage, right? However, you have some people that are now looking for independence. So a nation state is now these community with these common characteristics that now have its own independent government, right? So what leads to the rise of nationalism in the 19th century? So for starters, you have things like the Congress of Vienna. You're going to now have different ethnic groups being spread throughout several countries with the redrawn map, right, which now can lead to unification efforts later on. The ideals of democracy are spreading, and the ideals of the French Revolution continue to kind of just be ever present. And it's going to lead to discontent in Europe, especially in areas like Italy and Germany, which we know have been broken up into these kind of independent kingdoms and such, right? So there are two types of nationalistic movements. You have what's called unification and separation, right? Unification is taking culturally similar groups living in separate areas and uniting them to form kind of their own country, right? So this is going to be seen in Prussia and Austria, in parts of Austria and parts of what had been the Confederation of the Rhine, so Saxony, Bohemia, Bavaria, right? All of these independent German kingdoms and principalities. You are also going to have separation, which is now this culturally distinct group that's going to try and break away from a state, right, and form its own country, right? So an example of this would be Kurdistan, if it was possible, right? You have this ethnic group of people that live in the Middle East, basically between Turkey, Syria, Iraq, and Iran. And you are going to, if they they would love to be able to have their own independence and sovereignty away from these people to make their own decisions, right? So a separation movement. Another one would be the Basques, right? The Basques are this ethnic minority group in Spain, and they, if they could, would break away from Spain as well to form their own kind of little nation. You're also going to now have demands for political rights during this time, right? With the restoration of monarchies, right? Some people are going to be essentially screwed here. And with the ideals of the revolution and the Enlightenment still kind of front and center in spots, and people being not happy with these changes back towards the conservative mindset of monarchies and oppression that way, you're going to have now discontent leading to what's known as the revolutions of 1848 in several European countries. These revolutions are going to be largely unsuccessful, whereas the French Revolution is arguably successful, and it's only going to help to increase nationalistic tensions, right? And you can see on this map areas where these revolutions kind of broke out. And if you're looking at this one area where you might notice that they didn't kind of break out, or these big protests, is in the United Kingdom, right? And the United Kingdom, Great Britain, I should say, sorry. England is going to be spared of a lot of these revolutionary efforts, largely because it had been different, right? We know they no longer had a monarchy as a result of the English Civil War. In the same capacity, right? You have this constitutional monarchy. They no longer had an absolute monarchy. They have now what's called a constitutional monarchy, where there had been expanded political rights through voting, through legislation for these people, right? And they also had abolished slavery throughout the British Empire. Okay? Whew. All right, so that's it in a nutshell. So that was about 39 minutes, it looks like, of material. It's 3 different note sections. There is a There is a Quizlet up on Classroom. Let me bring that up to show you where it is. I'm going to be losing captions momentarily here. So just bear with me. So if you go to the Classroom, right, the Quizlet is in, if you go to the Classwork tab, it's right here. There is a link to the Quizlet. You can open it up. And there are a number of cards that should help you with part of the studying. I forget if it covers all three or not, but you'll be able to kind of you can run through a number of them. Okay, so make sure you sign in and you should be good. All right, good luck with your studying. If there's any questions right now, let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to be signing off.